As I mentioned, the protests in Biddeford, Maine continued all day today after Trump's agents killed yet another man in the street this morning in that small Maine city. Protests today there instantly and all day long, and they have continued into tonight. We will keep eyes on what's happening in Maine over the course of this hour. We will keep you apprised as we learn more. And you know, I'm cognizant of sort of how this sounds. I can hear myself just as well as you can doing this broadcast. And I know it sort of feels like a time warp, right? Like we are having one of the one of these cycles in the news where things seem to be kind of circling around and chewing on their own tails a bit, right? All these feel like very familiar headlines, or at least very familiar themes, right? Violent, poorly trained, poorly led Trump ICE agents killing people in American streets, American people in large numbers instinctively and instantly protesting against those killings. We've got frankly, the Strait of Hormuz closed again. And Trump once again promising that, oh yeah, it won't be Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz from here on out. It will be us closing the Strait of Hormuz. And somehow that will be better. Again, yet again. Right? Today on the National Mall, remember the secret handshake people, the people who've done like the Trump Epstein gold statues? Today they put up a new one of those statues, this one commemorating Trump losing the Iran war. It's called Participation Trophy. It has a big #1 embossed on the side of it. The word participant is on it in all caps. And then the plaque on it says Iran War Participation Trophy. We hereby award President Donald J. Trump this participation trophy for his enthusiastic involvement in the Iran war. While some concern themselves with military strategy, diplomacy, or measurable outcomes, President Trump demonstrated the courage to participate regardless of the final score. President Trump joins the ranks of children everywhere who receive recognition for simply showing up. We join you in celebrating this remarkable achievement. The Iran War Participation Trophy for Donald Trump. That's on the National Mall as of today. It's right near the reflecting pool that Trump has apparently destroyed and now fenced off. And the reflecting pool has again just been drained. And they are again having work done on it in a no-bid contract by the same Trump-connected firm that did such a great job on the reflecting pool the first time around. I mean, these headlines, they recur. We've also today got another federal judge just ripping Trump for one of his most outlandish schemes. Federal judge in Florida today just ruled that Trump's ham-handed effort to back up the truck into the Treasury to take $1.8 billion in taxpayer money and call it a settlement with his own administration, and his effort to proclaim himself and his family to have forever immunity from all tax crimes and also call it some sort of settlement. According to a federal judge in Florida today, those things are not legal settlements of any kind. They will neither be allowed to happen, nor will they be allowed to stand as effectively an attempted fraud on the court. The judge's 56-page ruling today was just super blunt. Quote, this action was never about a party seeking judicial resolution of a legal issue or a factual dispute. The nature of the suit itself, the conduct of the parties and counsel make plain that this was an attempt to use the court to provide some legitimacy to an agreement to confer immunity to people and entities affiliated with the president, and to earmark billions of dollars from American taxpayers to redress grievances not defined in the law. An attempt to use the court to provide some legitimacy to this otherwise totally not legal scheme. The judge also referred Trump's lawyers in this matter to their respective bar associations for potential discipline in the bar or other ethics proceedings. And that includes Trump's acting attorney general, Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche, who incidentally is supposed to have his confirmation hearing this week to be the actual attorney general of the United States. With the sudden death of Republican Senator Lindsey Graham this weekend and the extended hospitalization of Republican Senator Mitch McConnell, Todd Blanche's confirmation prospects are on somewhat thin ice already. But Todd Blanche today being referred to the bar by a federal judge for this kind of misconduct on behalf of what the judge describes as one of the president's illegal schemes, well, this can't help his chances. And I recognize, even as I'm saying these things, that I sound like I'm skipping. I'm a record that keeps skipping back, right? A lot of these things feel like familiar headlines. Trump's agents killing people in the streets. Americans protesting about it at the top of their lungs. Trump blowing it in Iran. Trump getting laughed at for blowing it in Iran. Trump's lawyers getting laughed out of court and then getting in legal trouble themselves for his latest illegal shenanigans. It's like these things are static categories of news in the Trump era. And of course, you can add to that the fact that this week we apparently are going to suffer through, once again, Trump trying to get people exercised over the fact that he lost the 2020 election, which he lost. The president is apparently planning some kind of primetime speech on Thursday to talk, again, about how wrong it is, what a scandal it is that he lost the 2020 election. His desperation ramping up on this subject. Right? In recent days, his effort to subpoena information about election workers in Fulton County, Georgia in 2020 was thrown out in court. He's now taken hundreds of FBI personnel and taken them off whatever else they were working on to assign them instead to work in Fulton County, Georgia on something. We don't know what exactly that something is, but it's apparently required them to push out the special agent in charge at the FBI field office in Atlanta, and now at least 2 FBI intelligence analysts who refused to be part of these reindeer games and had to be fired so that they could go forward. Trump's DOJ, within the past week, has now threatened in writing to jail all these senior election officials in all the states. On top of all that, he's now fired everyone on the Federal Election Assistance Commission, which helps states with election security and certifies voting machines. And so while the 2020 election fixation is a static category of Trump nonsense, tonight we're going to be talking with one of the commissioners from the Election Assistance Commission who has just been fired. We'll talk with him about what this means, that he and his fellow commissioners have been removed, and what he thinks we should be doing to keep the election safe. But tonight we're also going to be talking with one of the best First Amendment lawyers ever in this country about something else that Trump likes to rant about all the time, and it can therefore seem like static news. But again, he's at least now getting more and more desperate about it, and therefore more reckless about it, and the pushback against it is stronger than ever. We're going to be talking with superstar attorney Ted Boutros tonight about the reporters who are fighting back hard against Trump's effort to put them in jail if they don't give up their sources. This is something that's going to come to a head over the next 48 hours. Donald Trump is someone who does the same stuff over and over and over again, right? From the reflecting pool to Iran, to attacking the free press, to sending his thugs out to kill people in the streets and then covering up for them when they do it. Trump does the same things over and over again. But you know what changes over time? The response changes. Our understanding of his fixations changes. The pushback changes. The fight back changes and appears to be getting stronger and more fearless over time. And that, in turn, pushes him to more and more and more desperate actions on these same things that he keeps acting on over and over again. As the pushback against him gets stronger, he gets more desperate and more reckless in the way he acts out. And that desperation does not make him more effective, quite the contrary. But it does mean that the real story right now, the determinative thing to watch right now in our country, is not him, because he is eminently predictable. The real thing to watch right now is Americans fighting back and saying no. Everywhere they're doing it. In the streets, in the states, in the courts, occasionally even in Congress.
We did a good job. We did it right. I'd do it 1,000 times over.
The president says you're dead wrong about election security, and to him you say what?
There is no foreign power that is flipping votes. There's no domestic actor flipping votes. I did it right. We did it right. This was a secure election.
So that's Chris Krebs. He's the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. He gave that interview to 60 Minutes in the immediate aftermath of the 2020 election. The administration in which he served was Republican, was Donald Trump's administration. He was a lifelong Republican, but he had a national security job, much in the same way that, Miles, you did. He was debunking all of Trump's election lies about foreign interference. But importantly, the DNI, as Laura, you said, was John Ratcliffe. But until May of that year, the person in charge of protecting all the intelligence agencies was Rick Grinnell. So Trump was up to his eyeballs, not just in Republicans, but in MAGA Republicans. Laura, is there any reporting that he's going to bring back any of the Democrats who ran those agencies when President Obama was president or President Biden was president and the elections were secure? Because, again, he's run 3 times. The 2 times he won, Democrats were president, and they ran all these agencies in charge of cybersecurity and national intelligence.
No, there's no indication that he's going to bring back any of those Democrats.
Why not? Those are the only elections he trusts.
That's true if you go based on what he says and when he's actually won. But to the point that you were making before the break, I just want to address it because we've seen the president's playbook before when it comes to when all of a sudden, Republicans win elections, when he wins, and whether or not he would backtrack off of these claims and these falsehoods that he's likely about to spread as soon as this Thursday. Because my colleague Jake Traylor also added to our reporting saying that the president's speech this coming Thursday is going to be about this, about his allegations of foreign election interference in 2020. And if it turns out that Republicans do well in the midterms, better than expected, if they keep control of the House, then we have the president's playbook there. Because in the past, when he won in 2024, he said, well, we made it too big to rig. So he rationalizes and he comes up with explanations for why when he floods the zone with this disinformation, if he ends up winning, he just excuses it. But I think that when I talk to election administrators, including one I was just talking to today about this coming out, them trying to release these documents, what really stuck with me was that this election administrator said that they really feel like the confusion is the point here, that the chaos is the point, because already they have a lot of voters that are coming up to them, asking them about the rules in this upcoming election and if they're going to have to provide their passports. And so much of the job of election administrators right now and officials is to simply tell voters, look, the rules for our state, including in swing states, hasn't changed. And so they're just trying to keep up with that level of disinformation right now and tell voters that it is safe and secure and they can turn out and vote.
Director Brennan, if people can't trust the outcome now, when Trump, with all the lies he's spread, is the president of the United States, when Trump's appointees have a supermajority on the Supreme Court, when Trump's MAGA Republicans have a majority in the Senate, when Trump's sycophants have a majority in the House, they never will. I mean, what are we doing here?
That's very, very worrisome, Nicole, because as you point out, the executive branch and the president has tremendous authority to exert the full weight and influence of the executive branch. And he's clearly trying to do that, not just in terms of manipulation of the perceptions of reality, but also using the instruments of governance. And so the next 4 months, I can clearly see that Donald Trump is going to do everything in his power and beyond that to be able to affect the outcome of the election. And so there is really a question about, in light of what he is doing and how he is putting both thumbs and the rest of his fingers on the scale, whether or not that outcome can be trusted. You asked before, what happens if the Republicans win? Well, I think there's going to be quite a serious doubt that they won fairly, just because of what he has done. And it's a similar, what's happening with the Department of Justice. All the corruption and all the action that is going election, I expect Donald Trump to use, again, whatever tactic, ploy, or, underhanded maneuver he can. And unfortunately, there are too many individuals who surround him in the White House and too many individuals in Congress. And then, as you point out, even in the Supreme Court, who are willing to turn a blind eye to the obvious and brazen corruption and actions that he is taking.
Miles, I guess we're in a post-fact, post-truth era. We're also in sort of a post-humility era. But culturally, people hate bad losers. People hate cheaters. And he's projecting both to the country in his own base. What does this moment say about culture and about sort of the collapse of both any sense of humor and any morality inside his accomplices in the media, in the sort of Larry Ellison conglomerate, in the manosphere? All these tropes about, masculinity are gone when you've got someone cheating out loud in full view of their own base of support and really trying to sell this story that only Obama and Biden run free and fair elections.
Well, you know what? Let me validate that story, Nicole, because I'll tell you something. You've got two generations of election protection here on the screen. It's, John Brennan, Director Brennan from the Obama administration, and then I was working on election protection in the Trump administration. I have never seen anyone do more sophisticated and impressive work on election protection than the director and his team. And I didn't even witness it in person. I have disagreed with John Brennan on issues on which reasonable people can disagree on policy issues. And I have got to say, when we came in, when we took over in the Trump administration, we were given a gift by this man and his team, an incredibly detailed, thorough analysis of interference in our democracy. He's a patriot of the highest order for doing that. And we then continued to try to protect our elections, not because of Donald Trump, but despite Donald Trump. Let me give you a revelation here on air. In 2018, we knew that these countries that Director Brennan had told us were interfering in our democracy in 2016 were still interfering in our 2018 midterms. But you know what Donald Trump wanted to do? He didn't want to talk about Russian interference because it was helpful to him. He only wanted to talk about Chinese interference. He went in front of the UN General Assembly and said China was interfering in our elections. And our agents and analysts were gobsmacked because we also knew so were the Russians. That's the type of president we had. He only wanted to protect against interference that would hurt him and not protect against interference that would help him. So the things you heard Chris Krebs say, and his head of the DNI and his FBI chief and his CIA director, they did the good work to protect our elections in 2020, not because of Trump, but despite Donald Trump.
So, Miles, if he went out in 2018 and told a lie or cherry-picked, which is, I think, what Laura's describing is planned for Thursday night, how should Thursday night be covered?
It should be covered as twice warmed over, as leftovers. I hope not just every journalist. I hope every American flashes back to that episode I just mentioned in September of 2018 when Donald Trump went out there and he was ranting about Chinese interference. We had no indication that Chinese interference in our elections influenced votes. Did the Chinese try to interfere? Yeah, they did. We declassified it. That information is out there. They tried to meddle. The Iranians tried to meddle. The Russians tried to meddle. But importantly, we don't believe they changed votes or influenced our elections. He's going to go back to the well on those claims from 2018 and just focus on one threat actor that was opposed to him to try to make this case again. But you know what I hope people see is this is a loser. This is an old man and a loser who cannot handle the fact that he lost an election fair and square. I think that's what's going to come through on Thursday rather than any breathtaking new information, because I'm going to tell you, it is not there.
Why then, Miles, would he have not declassified that intelligence if he'd done it in 2018 and he was still the president from November to January 20th at the time?
Well, I don't know. I wish I knew what he took with him down into the basement of Mar-a-Lago. And we would only know if they would let the results of that investigation be released. But you know what gives me heart, Nicole? We are eventually going to find out. We are eventually going to find out what this man took, the lies he's cooking up behind the scenes, because they cannot sweep it all under the rug. They're going to try. They've tried to say the Presidential Records Act doesn't apply to them. But you know what? You can't erase the people who've witnessed it now, the people who witnessed it then. We will eventually know. And in the meantime, we just need to keep heart. We need to keep attention to the foundations of our democracy. We need to push back against the lies publicly.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Well, a lot has been said about Senator Lindsey Graham in the 2 days since he died suddenly, and for good reason. He has been one of the most instantly recognizable, prominent figures in American politics for decades. garrulous, entertaining. He was what we call in the business a good talker. But I think everyone is missing the picture. Because Lindsey Graham was not exactly an architect of the MAGA era, but I think he may have been this era's single most emblematic figure in ways I think people don't appreciate. Back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan used to use a three-legged stool as the metaphor for his era of the Republican coalition. The legs were religious conservatives, anti-communist national security conservatives, and fiscal conservatives, free market Milton Friedman types. And that's how he viewed the key components of the Reagan-era coalition. In this century, I think the three-legged stool has turned into three architects, three people whose visions defined the coalition now. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, longtime Republican leader Mitch McConnell, and, of course, the man there, Donald Trump. And together, they represent the different aspects of conservatism that have all come together to create our current political reality. Now, Lindsey Graham was not one of those architects, but his trajectory actually explains, I think, the current Republican Party better than almost anyone else, because Lindsey Graham did have a project that he was working on. Because of the rise of the Never Trump movement, a lot of people will point to Trump's 2016 victory as this huge rupture in this party, a moment of radical and irreversible disjuncture. And obviously that's true in many ways. We talked about it in the program night in, night out. But, and this is the most important point, and an insight that Graham appreciated earlier than many, there was also and has been a lot of continuity in the Republican Party. I mean, think about it this way, right? Most of the people who loved George W. Bush, who supported George W. Bush in the Iraq War, for instance, Lindsey Graham being one of them, voted for Republicans for the past quarter century, are largely still Republicans now. They love W, now they love Trump. That's basically what the modal Republican voter of a certain age is. There's a straight line of continuity to be drawn through the entirety of the 21st century history of the Republican Party, and Lindsey Graham saw that. He understood that. He saw that it was all part of a shared, continuous project conservatives have been after since the turn of the millennium, since the war on terror started. And yes, people have been playing the clips in which he talked about Donald Trump as a ridiculous joke. We're going to get annihilated and deserve to. He thought he would lose Republicans the 2016 election. But when it turned out that Trump was able to win, Graham jumped on board with the idea that this was great for the Republican Party. And again, he saw something, right? He saw it allowed the party to reach voters they never had before. And in many ways, Graham was able to continue his advocacy for war and for foreign intervention. In the Bush years, Graham was an enthusiastic backer of the war on terror and the Iraq War in particular, probably one of the most famous of the advocates. And in the Trump years, he was an enthusiastic backer of Israel's war in Gaza and then the Iran war that he has been advocating for decades. And like anyone thoroughly ideologically committed, he had his wavering moments. Famously, on the evening of January 6, 2021, he exhaustedly took to the lectern to denounce the Capitol riot to overthrow the election.
Trump and I, we've had a hell of a journey. I hate it being this way. Oh, my God, I hate it. From my point of view, he's been a consequential president. But today, first thing you'll see. All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough.
Count me out. Enough is enough. I remember watching those words at the time. And that, again, in the way that Lindsey Graham understood something about the nature of the party and the coalition he was part of, that was the feeling of most Republicans that day. Though, according to Donald Trump, that sentiment was a little short-lived.
Now, he had one bad moment, and that was, in the January 6th thing when he stood up. All right, now I've had it. That's it. I can't do it anymore.
Regardless, what Graham ended up being more adrenaline than real belief. Because just 5 weeks later, Graham, like most Republicans, voted to acquit Trump during his second impeachment. Probably the most consequential vote of this entire era, right? And then, like most Republicans, Graham came to see that actually Trump could win again, that he was a powerful and important figure, and that he would further the Republican Party's shared goals, conclusions that both Mitch McConnell and I think Justice John Roberts, though he wouldn't admit it, have come to in their own way. And so Graham re-embraced Trump, attacking the few Republicans that broke ranks and voicing a conclusion that turned out to be grounded very firmly in an astute understanding of political reality.
Can we move forward
without President Trump? The answer is no. I've always liked Liz Cheney, but she's made a determination that the Republican Party can't grow with President Trump. I've determined we can't grow without him.
Lindsey Graham wasn't a victim or a mark. He wasn't weak. He didn't flip-flop. No, he was a man who had his own project he was pursuing, and he viewed Trump as crucial to that project. He says it right there. Graham has been one of the president's staunchest allies, particularly in the second term. He's managed to focus and execute what he has viewed as the pillars of the Republican Party's priorities, something he succinctly, if cheekily, articulated back in 2025 as he spoke before the Republican Jewish Coalition Leadership Summit.
I just want to say I feel good about the Republican Party. I feel good about where we're going as a nation. We're killing all the right people and we're cutting your taxes.
We're killing all the right people and we're cutting your taxes. Now, Graham was known for being a pretty funny guy. It's one of the things that endeared him to his colleagues. And that's kind of a joke. People laugh, but only kind of. Kidding on the square, right? Right there, and Graham saying it, the central continuity of the last 20 years for the Republican Party. The reason that I think Graham stayed at the center the whole time. What has kept people in the tent? The two pillars he articulated, killing all the right people and cutting your taxes. That's what the project was. In Lindsey Graham's own words, that's what he looked to his party to deliver. It's what he wanted it to deliver. He was committed to that vision. And it was able to do so through Donald Trump. Graham died just hours before he was set to go out on Meet the Press, where he would most likely continue to advocate for continuing the war against Iran that he had been advocating for 20 years. That was one of the central projects that he was engaged in. And today, Trump gave his first speech since Graham's passing, although one has to note that he didn't bother to give him a mention.
What an honor. And we have that great music. We love great music. We have Roger with me, 120 Indianapolis 500s. That's not bad. He was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by me when he won 17, and he just kept winning.
Trump did recommend on social media today that Lindsey Graham's sister should serve out his term. Sure enough, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster announced that Graham's sister, a mother of two who's never held elected office, would be appointed to temporarily take her deceased brother's seat. Now, a special primary election for that seat will be held on August 11th. But Graham's passing has also made the intense math of the Republican Senate that much harder for leader John Thune, particularly at a moment when Donald Trump's sort of at war with the Republicans in the Senate. Remember, Lindsey Graham sat as a crucial vote on the Judiciary Committee, where Trump's pick for Attorney General, his former criminal defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, is set to appear on Wednesday. That's a hearing the Senate leadership says will go ahead as planned. Meanwhile, Senator Mitch McConnell remains hospitalized. He's unable to vote. They issued a photo today showing him with his wife, and he's recovering. And there are a number of senators who are, for lack of a better word, free agents. From Maine, Susan Collins, who is desperately itching to show her independence from her party in her very hard-fought re-election fight in Maine, where the voters voted for Kamala Harris last time around. You've got Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, who recently voted with Democrats to limit Trump's ability to wage war on Iran, retiring North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis, who blocked Donald Trump's Fed chair nominee until the DOJ's investigation into outgoing Chair Jerome Powell was dropped. And of course, there's now a pair of senators who lost their primaries thanks to Trump, Louisiana's Bill Cassidy and Texas's John Cornyn.
Not since 1997 has a Democrat represented Montana in the House of Representatives. But a smoke jumper, meaning someone who literally jumps out of planes to fight remote firefighters, is giving it a go in Montana's 1st District. It covers the western part of the state, and despite including the liberal enclave cities of Missoula and Bozeman, the district broke for Trump by about 12 points in the last election. But smoke jumper and union leader Sam Forstag says he decided to run for Montana's 1st District after a quarter of the firefighters that he worked with were fired by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency last year. First, Bernie Sanders endorsed him, then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Forstag narrowly beat out 3 other Democrats, and he is now taking on a Republican with the full backing of his party. Conservative radio host Aaron Flint, who's running to replace retiring Representative Ryan Zinke, is endorsed by Zinke, as well as Governor Greg Gianforte, Senator Tim Sheehy, and Donald Trump, of course. But as the Montana Free Press noted at a Democratic primary candidate forum in March, Forstag was the only one on stage in work boots. And Democrats are hoping Forstag's populist politics, formed by his union work in Montana, will deliver a winning coalition from an electorate that feels disconnected from the people who are supposed to represent them. Joining me now is Sam Forstag, union leader, smoke jumper, and the Democratic candidate hoping to flip Montana's 1st congressional district. So thanks so much. I'm so glad to see you on set with me here. Tell me a little bit about why you think, after all this time, that this red district is flippable to blue.
Well, we know a Democrat can win in western Montana because a Democrat just won last cycle. John Tester, our U.S. Senator for 18 years, won Montana's 1st congressional district while losing statewide. And he did that in a year when I'd offer the National Democratic Party was doing everything they possibly could to make it harder for a Democrat to win in a place like Montana. And I know that we can win because, well, I got a lot of friends, coworkers, union members who are precisely the people who ended up voting for some of the schlubs who are tearing all of these systems that a lot of working people depend on down all around us. And they did not do that because they're too far gone. A lot of folks voted for these people because their lives were not getting better on a material basis year over year, not just in the last year, in the last 5, 10, 30 years. And well, if there's anything government is for, in part, it's to make sure that you can meet your basic material needs when the market is not meeting them. And when it comes to housing or healthcare or childcare, the market's not meeting a whole lot of needs for people in Montana.
So, as I mentioned, part of the reason you decided to run is that DOJ laid off, what was it, a quarter of your colleagues who are these, very elite firefighters who literally jump out of planes to fight wildfires. When you speak to voters, what do they tell you are the tangible consequences of this administration's cuts along the lines of the one that your colleagues just went through?
Well, when we were dealing with the DOJ cuts last year in Montana, the people they fired, they weren't smoke jumpers. They were the lowest paid people in large part that we have in our public lands agencies. When they fired 360 Montanans 2 Valentine's Days ago in one day with no cause and no notice, 85% of them were making $19.70 an hour or less, swinging tools in the woods, running chainsaws, doing the science it takes to actually manage our public lands. And when I called Ryan Zinke, our congressperson, time after time, I got crickets. And so I decided if he's going to come take my coworkers and my union members' jobs, I'm going to come take his. And that is in part what this is about. And they said it was all about government efficiency, right? Well, there's not much more efficient than somebody swinging a tool in the woods for $12 an hour to keep a trail clear. What it was about was power and consolidation and gutting the public services that a whole lot of working people depend on, and the public lands that you might depend on to keep your chest freezer full if you go hunting, or that you depend on to go hiking or skiing, or just to have a little time to recreate if you can afford that time when you're having to work 2 or 3 jobs to keep a roof over your head in a place like Montana today.
So why do you think it was that they went after your colleagues? Again, you said it's not a lot of savings in dollar terms. Yeah. Presumably, these are rural voters who largely vote for Republicans, largely vote for Donald Trump. Yeah. Presumably, this administration cares most about voters like them. Why gut an agency like yours?
Well, I think it is because we have a lot of representatives in Washington who are too corrupt or careless or callous to actually listen to the people being affected by these policy decisions. I mean, like I said, when we reached out to our representative, the Republican in the seat, whose hand-picked successor, Aaron Flint, I am running against, the guy who dropped out of this race with 48 hours before the deadline to put his political puppet in his stead, I got crickets. He didn't even pick up the darn phone. And what this was about is about actually consolidating power for a lot of people whose incentives are to gut our public services. And that is the same whether it is gutting health care, so that a 62-year-old woman ends up in the emergency room because she couldn't access a primary care doctor, and somebody else is getting richer off of all of our backs, as it is when they gut our public lands. And, well, I end up on a wildfire where I've got to call in large air tankers of fire retardant at $7,000 a pop. It just happens that $7,000 goes to a wildland fire contracting company that one of our U.S. senators owns, and that has made him the 3rd richest man in the United States Senate. The people in power right now, their interests do not align with us. And if we want to make our government work for us as working people, we got to send working people to Washington so we can fight for ourselves.
President Trump today signed an executive order decreasing the size of 2 national monuments in Utah, opening 2 million acres to oil drilling and other development. You have been vocal about protecting public land. Talk to me about why that is important to you and why you think that should be important to Americans.
Yeah, I mean, rolling back protections for Bears Ears and Grand Escalante, that is 2 to 3 million acres of public lands that just lost their protections. And it's not just that, it's 1.4 million acres up in Alaska, in Alaska to the boundary waters in Minnesota. And what I've been telling people throughout this campaign is that our public lands, they're not just those lines on a map. There are a whole lot of people working their tails off to make sure that you can actually access our public lands. And public lands for people in Montana, that's the place you go to get food. That's where you go in hunting season to make sure that you can feed your family. That is where you go if you cannot afford to buy your own ranch land to go hunt on and set up that tree stand. Public lands are one of the last great equalizers we have in the country, and it is one of the best parts of our heritage that we can hand down to the next generation. And I'm not willing to sit down and stand by while they gut our public lands and try to privatize them just to make another buck for their rich donors. That doesn't serve us, and we do not have to accept it. We can change that right now.
Well, Sam Forstek, thanks so much for your time tonight. Best of luck.
Thank you for having me. And if anybody wants to help, go to samformontana.com. I need all the help I can get, and we can do this. Thank you, Catherine.
Folks in the media don't seem as aggressive, if you will, with this particular administration and this particular president, given how aggressive this president is with the media apparatus. This is our conversation. Take a listen to Eugene.
There's a real fear about what the president and his team will do to their organizations, to them. People are focused on making sure they have their own jobs, they're able to feed their families. They worry about that. They worry about what that blowback is.
What happened to without fear or favor? What happened to the journalists do their job, especially as White House journalists, and they do so without fear or favor?
Sounds good. It sounds good until you are faced with an administration, unlike any other. All that sounds good until you get punched in the face. Like, what is it when you get up in that thing and all that planning, all that boxing sounds good until you get in and get knocked in the face. And so, I think across the board, our institutions were not prepared for Donald Trump and his administration, especially the second one.
And it boils down to power. Eugene was detailing conversations that people had privately. Some White House journalists had told him when he was the White House Correspondents Association president, but also as soon as recently. This administration has been willing to wield power in a very malicious way, and it is having a chilling effect just as much as there are journalists out there still willing to ask the questions, organizations still willing to defend good journalism. There are also people that are hedging their bets a little bit.
Yeah, and I think this is a moment when we talk about these stories, they got subpoenaed, right? We need to really unpack it a little bit because it gets to the point that you're raising. Because there's three things here. One is that they broke their standard. The standard for these types of investigations is you go government first. You never go to media first, and you don't have to take my word for it. 30 days ago, Todd Blanchard was on a podcast with Sean Hannity talking about this very issue, and he explained to Sean Hannity what the administration's policy was and said, we always start these investigations with the government first. We never target reporters first. That's what the standard is. That's clearly not what happened here. They violated their own standard that Todd Blanchard articulated. Okay. Second, and we kind of glossed over it, but it's a big deal. The FBI director ran the investigation from the White House. Mm-hmm. This is very different than anything that's ever happened really in the past, even with all the other attacks. It's hyper-politicization coming right out of the White House running these types of attacks against the administration. So that reinforces what Eugene was noting. And then the kicker, they didn't just get subpoenas. It happened at night. And they didn't need to, at their houses. They didn't need to do that. They know who the lawyers are. That was to send a message. Mm-hmm. That was to make it personal, because there are a lot of other individuals out there that they're also speaking to and communicating with these types of actions. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it really adds a lot of texture to what you were discussing. And that's the reality of it. That's the day-to-day decision that a lot of newsmakers are having to make.